The clock in the prison ticked louder than ever that morning. Every second seemed heavier than the last, as if the walls themselves knew what was coming. Inside cell 12, Marcus felt a strange calm wash over him, a calm he hadn't felt in years. Today was supposed to be the end. His execution was scheduled for the afternoon, and all the fear, anger, and regret of a lifetime had finally caught up with him. But Marcus had one final request. One thing he needed before he faced the ultimate sentence. And it wasn't a last meal or a phone call to family. No, it was something else entirely. Something that left the guards whispering and the warden frowning in disbelief. "I want to see Jonathan Roumie," Marcus had said the night before during his final meeting with the chaplain. The chaplain froze. "Jonathan Roumie? The actor?" "Yes," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "The one who plays Jesus in The Chosen. I need to see him before it's too late." The request had caused chaos in the prison. Guards whispered, officials scratched their heads, and the warden debated the practicality of such a request. He had dealt with many last-minute appeals, many bizarre requests, but this one felt different. Something about Marcus's eyes made them pause, a mixture of desperation and a strange peace that didn't match the violent man they'd known for years. By the morning of his execution, Marcus had been through countless hours of reflection. He remembered every mistake, every choice that had led him here. Yet, behind the walls of regret, there was a flicker of hope, the hope that maybe, just maybe, a single meeting could change the story of his last hours. Word had spread quickly through the prison. Marcus wanted to see Jonathan Roumie. Some laughed at the idea. Others shook their heads. But for Marcus, it wasn't about fame, or celebrity, or proving anything to anyone. It was about peace. Redemption. A chance to face his final moments with something more than fear. As the hour approached, tension in the prison was almost unbearable. Guards checked the locks twice, chaplains whispered prayers, and reporters outside murmured rumors. And in the middle of it all, Marcus waited calmly, his heart beating, ready for a visitor who could change everything in the few minutes he had left. The heavy prison doors clanged open, echoing down the hallways in a way that made everyone stop and listen. Guards stiffened, prisoners glanced curiously from behind their bars, and the warden's brow furrowed. The visitor had arrived. Jonathan Roumie stepped into the sterile, tense environment, carrying with him a calm presence that seemed almost otherworldly. He wasn't just an actor in a television show. He carried himself with a quiet authority, a gentleness that made people instinctively feel safe. As he walked toward Marcus's cell, whispers rippled through the prison. "Is that him?" a young guard muttered. "I think so," another replied, barely daring to breathe. Marcus, sitting on the edge of his cot, looked up. His eyes widened slightly, but there was no panic, no fear. Just an intense, almost desperate hope. All these years, he had imagined this moment, this one encounter that might bring some sense of peace to his soul before everything ended. And now, it was here. Jonathan stopped just a few feet away, his gaze steady, warm, and unjudging. He didn't flinch, didn't recoil at the sight of Marcus, a man whose past was marred with violence, crime, and tragedy. Instead, he simply nodded. "Marcus," Jonathan said softly, almost reverently. "I'm here." Marcus swallowed hard, his throat tight. Words felt useless. He had spent hours rehearsing what he would say, how he would ask for forgiveness, how he might explain his need for this final meeting. But when the moment came, all he could do was stare, feeling the weight of reality settle over him. I don't even know if you understand why I wanted to see you," Marcus finally admitted, his voice trembling. "I didn't want a sermon. I didn't want someone telling me I'm forgiven or condemned. I just needed to see you." Jonathan's eyes softened. "I understand more than you think," he said. "You're not here for me. You're here for yourself. Sometimes, we need a mirror to face the parts of ourselves we've hidden for too long." Marcus's hands trembled as he reached toward Jonathan, then pulled back. He had never been a man of faith in the traditional sense, yet now he felt something unfamiliar stirring within him: humility, fear, hope, and the faintest glimmer of peace. The prison chaplain, who had arranged the meeting, stood silently to the side, sensing that this was a moment beyond sermons or rules. Even the guards, trained to maintain order and distance, couldn't help but watch the interaction with a kind of awe. Something in the room had shifted. I've made so many mistakes, Marcus said, voice breaking. I've hurt people. I've taken lives. I've destroyed lives. And now it's too late. But I wanted someone to know that I'm not just nothing. Jonathan knelt slightly to meet his gaze. You're not nothing, he said firmly. Every life has value, Marcus. Every soul has a story, and sometimes the darkest stories can shine the brightest lessons. Marcus swallowed. He had never thought of his life that way, that even in failure, even in guilt, there could be meaning. A tear ran down his cheek. He wiped it hastily, embarrassed, yet unwilling to deny it. For several minutes, the two sat in silence. No words were needed. The presence itself was enough. Jonathan's calmness radiated a quiet understanding that made the hours of fear and anxiety Marcus had carried begin to dissolve. Can you pray with me? Marcus finally asked, barely above a whisper. Jonathan nodded. Of course. They bowed their heads. Words of hope, forgiveness, and grace flowed gently, not as a lecture, but as a shared human experience. Marcus felt a weight lift from his chest, a burden he hadn't realized he'd been carrying for decades. For the first time in years, he felt a strange sense of release, not from the world, not from punishment, but from the chains of his own regret. Outside the cell, guards glanced at each other. They had never seen anything like this, a condemned man finding peace in his final hours through a simple human connection. Phones were out, eyes widened, whispers filled the hallway, but no one dared interrupt. When the prayer ended, Marcus looked up at Jonathan with eyes that glistened, not with fear this time, but with a fragile, tentative hope. Thank you, he said, his voice barely audible. For being here. For just being here. Jonathan placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. It's not about me. It's about what's in your heart, Marcus. Take this moment with you. Let it remind you that even now, even here, there is grace. And in that small, quiet cell, surrounded by steel bars and the weight of the world, something miraculous happened. A human connection that defied circumstance, a moment of redemption in the unlikeliest of places. Marcus finally leaned back against the wall, a small, almost imperceptible smile forming. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. Little did anyone know, this meeting was about to shock not only the prison, but everyone who would later hear this story. The prison clock ticked relentlessly, each second a reminder that time was running out. Marcus sat back against the cold wall, his heart still pounding, but for the first time in decades, he felt something he hadn't thought possible: peace. The presence of Jonathan Roumie had done something no one else had been able to accomplish in his long, tortured life. It had opened a crack in the walls of guilt, fear, and despair that had imprisoned his soul far longer than the steel bars surrounding him. Outside the cell, whispers had grown into hushed murmurs. Guards exchanged glances, the chaplain wiped his eyes discreetly, and even the warden stood frozen, unsure of how to intervene without ruining a moment that seemed almost sacred. This was no ordinary visitation. Something extraordinary was happening, and everyone could feel it. Marcus took a shaky breath, glancing at Jonathan. I think I understand now, he said, voice trembling. All these years, I've been running from myself. From the choices I made, from the people I hurt. And I thought there would never be a way to make peace. Jonathan smiled softly. Peace isn't about erasing the past, Marcus. It's about accepting it, learning from it, and letting it guide you in the time you have left. Even if that time is only hours. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his voice. I don't deserve forgiveness. I know that. But, somehow, I feel it. I feel it right now. And I don't want to waste it. Jonathan reached out, placing a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. Then don't. Live these moments fully. Let them be enough for your soul. Let them remind you that you are more than your mistakes. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the world outside fading away. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the heaviness of years of regret slowly lift. When he opened them again, he looked at Jonathan with a clarity he had never known. I don't want to leave this world angry. I don't want to leave it bitter. I want to go knowing that someone saw me, really saw me, even at my worst. Jonathan nodded. And now you have. You are seen, Marcus. You are understood. And that is enough to carry with you. Suddenly, the quiet was broken by the sound of footsteps approaching. The warden entered, followed by the execution team. Time had come. Marcus's chest tightened, but there was no panic, only a strange calm determination. He stood slowly, shaking slightly but standing straight, facing the reality he could not escape. Jonathan placed a hand on his arm. Remember this moment. Remember the peace you found here. Carry it with you, no matter what happens next. Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. I will. The final walk down the corridor was surreal. Guards flanked him, the clinking of chains echoing like a distant drumbeat. But inside Marcus, the fear that had gripped him for decades was gone. Instead, he carried the quiet courage that only a truly transformative human connection could provide. He remembered Jonathan's words, the prayer, the calm presence, and he realized that in these final moments he was not defined by his past, but by the way he faced it. As he was led into the execution chamber, the room fell silent. Every guard, every official, even the witnesses, felt the weight of the story that had unfolded. Marcus stood, hands restrained, heart steady, as the last procedures were explained. And in that silence, he closed his eyes and whispered a final prayer, not for the world, but for himself. He thought of Jonathan, the kindness, the calm, the understanding. And he smiled, small but genuine, for the first time in decades. When the final moment came, and Marcus faced the inevitable, the room was filled not with fear, but with a strange sense of awe. Something about the encounter, about the last meeting, the shared prayer, the quiet courage, had transformed what could have been a moment of despair into a testament of human redemption. The warden, observing from the side, felt tears prick at his eyes. The chaplain, too, struggled to maintain composure. Guards who had spent years enforcing rules and carrying out procedures stood silently, struck by the magnitude of what had just transpired. Even the prisoners, hearing rumors later, spoke in hushed tones about the man who had faced his final hours with peace and grace. Jonathan Roumie, standing outside, watched with a heavy but calm heart. He knew that the world would remember this story not for the crime, not for the punishment, but for the extraordinary humanity that had been displayed in the most unlikely of places. And that was the lesson everyone took away. Even in the darkest moments, even in the shadow of death, grace, compassion, and understanding could shine through, transforming not only the one facing the end, but everyone who witnessed it. Marcus left the world as he had lived these last hours, fully aware, fully human, and unexpectedly at peace. And the story, once told, would shock and inspire everyone who heard it. The echoes of Marcus's final moments lingered long after the prison doors closed. Guards, chaplains, and officials found themselves silent, almost frozen, unable to speak about what they had witnessed without feeling the weight of it pressing on their hearts. It wasn't just that a man had faced death, it was how he had faced it, transformed by a single act of kindness and understanding. Word of the meeting between Marcus and Jonathan Roumie spread quickly, first within the prison walls, then beyond. Stories were told and retold, each one emphasizing the inexplicable calm, the moment of shared humanity that had occurred in a place usually dominated by fear, anger, and despair. People spoke in awe of how Marcus, a man condemned for his past actions, had found a form of peace in his final hours, not through punishment, but through connection, empathy, and grace. What made the story so powerful was the contrast. Marcus had spent his entire life surrounded by choices that had led him to destruction. He had hurt people, destroyed lives, and made decisions that could never be undone. Many would assume that someone like him would meet his end with bitterness, anger, or resignation. Yet, in the presence of someone who saw him not just as a criminal but as a human being capable of reflection and redemption, he discovered something profound, that even the darkest moments could be softened by compassion. Jonathan Roumie's role in this story was not to absolve Marcus of his actions, nor to erase the pain he had caused. His presence was a mirror, a reminder that the essence of humanity lies not in perfection, but in the ability to face one's flaws, to seek understanding, and to embrace the possibility of grace. Marcus's transformation was not a magical cure, nor a cinematic twist. It was a quiet, real, and deeply human shift, the recognition that even in the face of finality, the human heart can find moments of clarity, peace, and forgiveness. For those who witnessed it, the lesson was impossible to ignore. True strength is not shown through dominance, anger, or fear. It is shown through compassion, empathy, and respect for others, even when circumstances suggest there is no reason to offer it. True courage is not in avoiding death, but in facing it with honesty, integrity, and an openness to the humanity of others. And true power is not in control, but in the ability to transform lives through kindness, understanding, and quiet presence. The story of Marcus and Jonathan Roumie has since become more than just an anecdote. It has become a lesson for people everywhere, a reminder that everyone has a story, and that the smallest acts of empathy can ripple far beyond the moment in which they occur. It teaches that redemption is not about changing the past, but about embracing the present and leaving a mark of humanity on those who remain. Even today, years later, guards who witnessed the meeting still speak of it in hushed tones. Chaplains recount it as an example of grace under the most unimaginable circumstances. And those who hear the story outside the prison walls feel a stirring within themselves, a call to recognize that in the most unlikely places, in the darkest times, it is possible to shine a light of understanding and hope. The world can be harsh, unforgiving, and sometimes cruel. People make mistakes, lives are shattered, and moments of despair can feel endless. Yet the story of Marcus serves as a timeless reminder that no matter how dark the path, no matter how final the circumstances, compassion, grace, and connection can transform even the last minutes of a life into a legacy of hope. As Jonathan Roumie quietly left the prison that day, he didn't make speeches, and he didn't seek recognition. He simply walked away, knowing that the impact of one human being truly seeing another could never be measured by applause, fame, or fame's fleeting approval. The ripple of that encounter would continue to travel, quietly teaching lessons of humility, respect, and humanity wherever it reached. And so, the moral is clear: respect, empathy, and understanding are not just ideals, they are lifelines. They have the power to transform lives, heal wounds, and bring light to the darkest of moments. We never know whose life we touch, or when a small act of kindness can change the course of someone's story, sometimes even their final story. If this story touches you, if it reminds you of the power of grace and the strength of the human spirit, take a moment today to honor it. Show respect to those around you, offer understanding where it's needed, and never underestimate the power of truly seeing another human being. Because sometimes, in the smallest, quietest acts, we create the loudest lessons that can resonate far beyond what we ever imagine. Days turned into weeks, and the story of Marcus's final meeting with Jonathan Roumie began to spread beyond the prison walls. What started as whispers among guards and chaplains quickly grew into a story shared in local news, social media posts, and conversations among people far removed from the world of incarceration. Everyone who heard it was captivated, not by the crime, not by the execution, but by the extraordinary humanity that had emerged in a place so often defined by despair. For the prison staff, the encounter had left a lasting impression. Guards who had once treated Marcus as just another inmate began to reflect on their own lives, their own choices, and their own relationships with the people around them. They realized that respect and compassion weren't just ideals, they were tangible forces that could change lives, even in moments when it seemed impossible. The chaplain, who had facilitated the visit, described it as a moment that redefined my understanding of grace. He spoke of Marcus's transformation in the final hours, a man who had lived decades in the shadow of guilt, yet found a flicker of peace when met with understanding and empathy. It was a reminder, the chaplain said, that no one is beyond hope. No one is beyond the power of being seen, truly seen, for who they are and who they can still become. Outside the prison, people reacted with awe and curiosity. Social media posts shared clips and accounts of the story, and the comments were filled with reflections on the lessons it carried. People wrote about forgiveness, second chances, and the idea that even in the darkest circumstances, there is an opportunity for light. Many shared personal stories, of times they had been judged, misunderstood, or condemned, and how Marcus's story gave them hope that they, too, could find peace in unexpected ways. The impact on Jonathan Roumie was quiet but profound. He rarely spoke publicly about the visit, but those who knew him described a change in his demeanor, a deeper sense of purpose and a renewed belief in the transformative power of human connection. For him, it was a confirmation of something he had always known, that seeing another person with empathy and offering grace could create ripples far beyond a single interaction. Marcus's story also reached people who had nothing to do with the prison system, people who lived ordinary lives and faced their own struggles. It became a lesson that transcended circumstance, background, and status. People began to recognize that redemption doesn't always require a second chance in the legal sense. Sometimes it begins in the heart, in the acknowledgement of mistakes, and in the courage to face them honestly. Families of victims and survivors also grappled with the story. Some found solace in the fact that Marcus had found a moment of clarity and peace before his death. Others debated whether such grace could or should exist in the shadow of crime and punishment. Yet, across the spectrum of opinion, one truth remained undeniable. The power of human empathy had changed the narrative. Within the prison, changes were subtle but real. Guards became more patient, chaplains more attentive, and even inmates noticed that kindness could exist where they least expected it. Marcus's final hours became a quiet legend, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, the human heart can respond to compassion, and that transformation, however brief, is still meaningful. The moral of the story resonated beyond any single moment. It reminded everyone that life is fragile, time is limited, and every interaction carries weight. A kind word, a moment of understanding, or even the simple act of acknowledging another person's humanity can ripple outward, creating changes that last far longer than anyone could anticipate. Years later, people who heard the story would tell it to their children, their friends, and colleagues. They would speak not of Marcus's crimes, but of the lesson his final hours offered, that grace, empathy, and respect have the power to heal wounds, transform lives, and leave an enduring mark on the world. Even now, the story continues to inspire. It challenges us to ask ourselves, how do we treat those around us? Do we judge too quickly? Do we assume the worst? Or do we recognize that every person, no matter how flawed, has the capacity to change, even in the smallest, quietest ways? Marcus's last request, and the response it received, left a legacy stronger than any sentence, louder than any punishment. It was a lesson in humility, in compassion, and in the extraordinary potential of the human heart. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful stories are not the ones we see in movies or books, but the ones that unfold quietly, in real life, changing lives forever. And so, long after the prison gates closed, the story of Marcus and Jonathan Roumie lived on, a testament to the fact that even at the edge of despair, the human spirit can shine, the heart can heal, and the smallest acts of grace can echo endlessly. Months passed after Marcus's execution, yet the memory of his final meeting with Jonathan Roumie continued to ripple through the prison and beyond. It was more than just a story of a man's last hours. It had become a symbol of what human connection, empathy, and grace could accomplish, even in the most unlikely circumstances. For the prison staff, the impact was profound. Guards who had once seen inmates as nothing more than numbers began to reconsider their approach. They started to engage differently with those under their watch, realizing that small acts of kindness, a calm word, a listening ear, a moment of patience, could have a lasting effect. The chaplain, who had facilitated the meeting, often spoke of Marcus as a turning point in his career. "I've been in this system for decades," he said, "but I've never witnessed a transformation like that. It reminded me why I do this work, why hope, understanding, and compassion matter, even in the darkest places." Inside the prison, the inmates began to talk about Marcus in a way they never had about any other condemned man. His story was no longer just a tale of crime and punishment. It was a testament to the possibility of inner change. Prisoners shared the story during quiet moments in the day room, discussing how even a few minutes of respect and human connection could leave a mark on a soul. They began to see each other differently, learning, in some small way, to recognize the humanity in those around them. Outside the prison, the story took on a life of its own. News outlets, podcasts, and social media platforms shared the narrative of Marcus and Jonathan Roumie. People from all walks of life, teachers, parents, students, and professionals, found themselves reflecting on the lessons it carried. They discussed the importance of empathy, the strength found in humility, and the courage it takes to confront one's past honestly. Marcus's last hours became a quiet challenge to everyone. How do we treat others when we don't have to? How do we practice grace when it isn't demanded of us? Jonathan Roumie, for his part, remained a figure of calm influence. Though he rarely spoke publicly about the meeting, those close to him could see its effect. He carried the memory of Marcus with him, using it as a reminder that even in small, intimate encounters, it is possible to plant seeds of hope. He often said quietly that the story wasn't about him. It was about what happens when someone chooses to see another person fully, without judgment, and with compassion. Families of victims, initially skeptical, came to understand a different dimension of the story. While the crime could never be undone, Marcus's final hours demonstrated the complexity of humanity. The fact that even someone who had caused immense pain could experience reflection, remorse, and a fleeting but genuine transformation. Many found that it softened their own anger in subtle ways, allowing them to process grief and loss with a slightly lighter heart. The story also inspired people in broader society. Schools began sharing it in ethics and philosophy classes, non-profits used it to illustrate the power of restorative practices, and religious groups referenced it as an example of grace in action. Marcus's last request, and the response it received, became a lesson that transcended circumstance, reminding everyone that compassion can reach places where punishment cannot. For those who had witnessed it firsthand, there was a quiet, unspoken understanding. The world is changed not always by grand gestures, but by small, intentional acts of recognition, respect, and humanity. Marcus's encounter with Jonathan Roumie was a beacon, proof that even in despair, even in confinement, the human spirit could respond to kindness, reflect on its own failings, and find a measure of peace. Years later, the story remained a touchstone. People remembered it not for the crime, not for the sentence, but for the humanity revealed in a fleeting, extraordinary moment. Marcus's legacy was no longer defined by the mistakes of his past, but by the profound impact of his final hours, a reminder that true transformation is possible, even in the most unlikely of places. And in the quiet corners of that prison, in classrooms across the country, and in the hearts of everyone who heard the story, one truth echoed again and again. The power of human connection, empathy, and grace is immeasurable. It can transform fear into peace, despair into hope, and fleeting moments into a lasting legacy. Marcus may have left the world physically, but through the lessons of his last hours, he had left something far greater behind. A story that continues to teach, inspire, and remind us all that even in the shadow of our mistakes, humanity and compassion can shine the brightest. Long after the prison gates closed and the world moved on, the story of Marcus's final hours continued to resonate, not only within the walls of the facility but far beyond. What had begun as a simple request, to see Jonathan Roumie one last time, had blossomed into something far greater than anyone could have anticipated. It had become a story about the human capacity for redemption, compassion, and grace. In a society often focused on punishment, judgment, and consequence, Marcus's story reminded everyone that the true measure of humanity lies not in perfection, but in the courage to confront one's flaws. Even at the edge of death, he had chosen reflection over bitterness, understanding over anger, and empathy over resentment. And it was through this choice, seemingly small in the grand scheme of things, that he left a legacy far larger than himself. The ripple effects of that encounter were felt in countless ways. Prison guards began to reevaluate how they treated inmates, learning that kindness and recognition could do more to change behavior than fear or authority ever could. Chaplains and volunteers shared the story to illustrate that even in the darkest circumstances, grace could be offered, and sometimes accepted, in ways that transformed lives. Families of victims, too, were touched by the narrative. While the pain of loss could never be undone, they found a strange solace in the story of Marcus's final hours. It demonstrated the complexity of human nature, that even those who have done harm are capable of reflection, remorse, and fleeting but genuine transformation. It reminded them that redemption is not always about legal absolution. Sometimes, it begins in the heart, in a quiet acknowledgement of wrongs, and in the courage to face the truth. Outside the prison, the story inspired millions. Social media posts, news stories, podcasts, and documentaries recounted the extraordinary final moments of a condemned man who sought understanding rather than validation. People connected with the story because it spoke to a universal truth. Everyone longs to be seen, understood, and accepted, even when the world has judged them harshly. Jonathan Roumie, quietly yet profoundly, became a symbol of what one person's presence and empathy can accomplish. His willingness to honor Marcus's request, without judgment or expectation, illuminated a simple but powerful principle. When we choose to see another human being fully, flaws, mistakes, and all, we create the possibility for transformation, peace, and grace. The lessons extended far beyond the prison walls. Teachers shared it in classrooms to demonstrate the power of empathy. Counselors referenced it to show how compassion can heal trauma. Families discussed it at dinner tables, inspiring conversations about forgiveness, accountability, and the human capacity for change. Marcus's final moments became a universal parable about how respect, kindness, and understanding matter in every interaction, not just the ones that are easy or convenient. Perhaps the most profound moral of all is this: respect is not owed based on wealth, status, or achievement. Respect is a reflection of character. It is something we give because it is right, because it acknowledges the inherent humanity in every person, and because, one day, The person we look down on may be the one whose presence or actions leave an indelible mark on our lives. Marcus's last request and the resulting encounter were a vivid demonstration of this truth. In the end, Marcus's story is a testament to the quiet but undeniable power of human connection. It reminds us that even in moments when all seems lost, there is potential for understanding, redemption, and peace. The prison walls could not contain the lessons that were learned in those final hours. The story lives on in the hearts of those who witnessed it, those who heard it secondhand, and those who carry its message forward into their own lives. The legacy of Marcus and Jonathan Roumie is timeless. That grace, empathy, and genuine human recognition can transform even the darkest of situations. That even in the shadow of death, humanity can shine. And that the smallest acts of kindness, the quietest gestures of understanding, and the willingness to truly see another person can echo far beyond what we could ever imagine. So, when you encounter someone today, a stranger, a friend, a colleague, or even someone you might initially judge, remember Marcus's story. Choose empathy. Choose understanding. Choose to see them fully, without judgment. Because sometimes, the most powerful lessons in life come not from grand gestures or heroic acts, but from the quiet, human moments where respect and grace meet need and vulnerability. In a world that often rushes past cruelty and indifference, Marcus's final hours shine as a beacon of hope. They remind us that the heart has an incredible capacity for change, even at the very end. They teach us that true strength is found in humility, and that the impact of our compassion can ripple far beyond what we ever imagined. And so, as his story continues to inspire, challenge, and move people across the world, one thing is clear. Humanity, empathy, and grace are the real measures of legacy. The story of Marcus's last request is not just about death, punishment, or crime. It is about the enduring power of the human spirit to transform, to forgive, and to shine even in the darkest hour. Type grace in the comments if you believe in the power of humanity and leave a mark of kindness wherever you go.